It is the sixth most abundant element in Earth's crust, dissolved in every ocean, scattered across every continent, resting in the salt on your dinner table. Sodium. For most of human history, we valued it as seasoning and preservative. But inside laboratories in Ningde, China, engineers see something else entirely. A way to power the electric age without fighting over a scarce and expensive metal. Sodium makes up roughly 2.6% of the Earth's crust. Lithium, by contrast, measures a mere 0.002%. One is nearly everywhere. The other is concentrated in a handful of nations, mined from brine pools in Chile and hard rock in Australia, its price swinging wildly with every shift in demand. That imbalance has become a source of global anxiety. As the world races to electrify cars, buses, power grids, entire cities, the question grows louder. What happens when everyone needs lithium at once, and there simply isn't enough to go around? At the center of this story sits one company, Contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, CATL. Founded in 2011, headquartered in Fujian Province, it is the largest battery manufacturer on Earth, supplying roughly a third of all electric vehicle batteries sold worldwide. Its cells power Teslas, BMWs, Volkswagens, and countless Chinese models. When CATL moves, the entire industry watches. And CATL has decided to chase a different chemistry, one built not on scarce lithium, but on the salt beneath our feet. The bet is audacious. Sodium-ion technology promises batteries that cost less, tolerate cold better, and free automakers from the geopolitical chokehold of lithium, nickel, and cobalt. If it works at scale, it could reshape which countries hold power in the electric century, and how much an affordable electric car actually costs. But sodium carries a heavy burden of proof. For decades it was dismissed as too weak, too heavy, too impractical. The fundamental physics stacked against it. To understand why CATL is willing to gamble billions on an element we've overlooked for a century, we first have to understand the problem sodium was summoned to solve: the fragile, volatile empire of lithium. Lithium is called white gold, and the nickname is earned. Between 2020 and late 2022, the price of lithium carbonate exploded, climbing more than tenfold, peaking near 600,000 yuan per ton before collapsing again. For any manufacturer trying to plan a decade ahead, such wild swings are a nightmare. A battery pack can account for a third of an electric vehicle's total cost, and lithium sits at the heart of that expense. But price volatility is only half the danger. The deeper problem is geography. More than half the world's known lithium reserves lie within the so-called Lithium Triangle, the high salt flats of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. Australia dominates hard rock production and processing. The chemical refinement that turns raw ore into battery-grade material is overwhelmingly concentrated in China, which handles well over half of global lithium refining. This means the entire electric future depends on a supply chain stretched across contested borders and unstable politics. The picture worsens with nickel and cobalt, the metals used in high-performance lithium cathodes. Roughly 70% of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where mining has been linked to child labor and brutal working conditions. Nickel demands strained supply from Indonesia and the Philippines. Each of these metals adds cost, ethical weight, and strategic risk to every cell produced. For governments and automakers alike, the dependency feels like a trap. A trade dispute, an export restriction, a mine closure, any single shock could send prices spiraling and stall production lines across the planet. Europe and the United States have poured billions into securing their own lithium, but the deposits take years, sometimes a decade, to bring online. Engineers understood the mathematics clearly. If electric vehicles were to scale from millions to hundreds of millions, and if grid storage were to swallow entire power plants worth of energy, the world would need far more lithium than it could reasonably dig up. The demand curve and the supply curve were diverging. Something had to give. So the search began for a chemistry that used a cheaper, safer, more abundant material. And the answer, strangely, had been sitting on the laboratory shelf for over 40 years. The idea of a sodium battery is not new. In fact, sodium-ion and lithium-ion chemistry were studied side by side in the 1970s and early 1980s. During the first great wave of rechargeable battery research, scientists knew sodium sat directly below lithium on the periodic table, sharing many of its chemical behaviors. On paper, it was an obvious candidate. Then lithium won. The reason came down to physics. A sodium ion is significantly larger and heavier than a lithium ion. Its atomic mass roughly 3 times greater. That bulk makes it harder to shuttle in and out of electrode materials, and it stores less energy for a given weight. When Sony commercialized the lithium-ion battery in 1991, delivering compact, high-energy cells for camcorders and laptops, the industry rushed in one direction. Sodium research withered. Funding dried up. For nearly 3 decades, sodium-ion technology sat dormant, a scientific footnote. But the very traits that doomed sodium in the age of shrinking electronics became irrelevant in a new age of abundance-driven demand. What changed was the problem itself. When the world needed batteries small enough to fit in a pocket, energy density ruled everything. When the world needed batteries cheap enough to blanket entire power grids and affordable cars, cost and supply security suddenly mattered more than sheer density. Sodium's weaknesses shrank in importance. Its strengths came into focus. Meanwhile, the science advanced. Researchers developed new cathode materials, layered transition metal oxides, and Prussian blue analogs that could hold sodium ions far more effectively than the crude compounds of the 1980s. On the negative electrode, they abandoned graphite, which sodium refuses to enter properly, and turned to hard carbon, a disordered form of carbon capable of absorbing the larger ions. Each breakthrough narrowed the performance gap. By the late 2010s, a handful of companies, including CATL and China's Haina Battery, began building real prototypes. The chemistry that had been abandoned as hopeless was suddenly, quietly viable again. What remained was the hardest step of all, turning a promising laboratory cell into a product the world could actually buy, and in April 2025, CATL claimed it had done exactly that. On the 21st of April, 2025, CATL took the stage for a launch it framed as historic. The company unveiled a new brand, Naxtra, its first family of sodium-ion batteries declared ready not for the laboratory, but for mass production. In an industry where announcements often outrun reality, CATL insisted this was different, a product bound for factories and vehicles, not just press releases. The numbers told the ambition. CATL claimed the Naxtra battery reached an energy density of around 175 watt-hours per kilogram, an extraordinary figure for sodium-ion, which had long been stuck well below lithium's range. That density began to approach the lithium iron phosphate cells already powering millions of affordable electric cars. For a chemistry once dismissed as too weak, crossing that threshold was a statement. CATL went further. It announced a passenger car battery, it said, could deliver a driving range of roughly 500 kilometers on a single charge, and a heavy-duty version aimed at commercial trucks. The company promised standout cold weather performance and safety characteristics that lithium struggled to match. And crucially, it committed to timing, production slated to begin scaling from 2026, moving sodium out of the realm of promise and into the marketplace. The stakes of that announcement stretched far beyond one company. CATL was signaling to the entire automotive and energy world that a second battery chemistry had arrived, one that could ease the pressure on lithium supply chains and drive down the cost of electric vehicles. Rivals took notice. If the largest battery maker on Earth was betting on sodium, the technology could no longer be treated as a curiosity. Yet a launch event is a controlled stage, and specifications are claims until proven at scale. The real test would come in factories, in freezing winters, in crash tests, and in the unforgiving arithmetic of cost per kilowatt hour. Skeptics noted that sodium still trails lithium in the one metric that has always defined the battery race: how much energy you can pack into a given weight and space. That single limitation shapes everything: range, size, and where sodium can realistically compete. To judge CATL's promise, we have to measure sodium against lithium directly, beginning with energy density. Energy density is the battleground on which every battery is judged. It measures how much energy a cell can store for its weight, expressed in watt-hours per kilogram, and it dictates almost everything a driver cares about: how far a car can travel, how heavy it must be, how much space the pack consumes. Here, lithium still holds the high ground. Modern lithium-ion cells routinely reach 250 to 300 watt-hours per kilogram in high-performance nickel-based chemistries. Even the cheaper, more rugged lithium iron phosphate cells, the workhorses of affordable electric cars, sit around 150 to 200 watt-hours per kilogram. CATL's Naxtra sodium battery, at a claimed 175 watt-hours per kilogram, lands near the lower edge of that lithium iron phosphate range. It is a remarkable achievement for sodium, but it does not overtake lithium. The gap traces straight back to physics. The sodium ion is larger and heavier than lithium, roughly 3 times the atomic mass. That bulk means each unit of stored charge carries more dead weight, and the electrode materials that host sodium tend to pack it less tightly. No amount of engineering can fully erase a limitation written into the periodic table. What this means in practice is range. CATL's claim of roughly 500 kilometers for a sodium-powered passenger car is competitive for everyday driving, comfortably covering a commute or a regional trip. But to achieve equivalent range, a sodium pack must generally be larger and heavier than a lithium one. In a compact city car, that penalty is tolerable. In a long-range luxury sedan or a performance vehicle chasing 700 kilometers on a charge, the weight becomes a serious handicap. This is why sodium's natural home is not the top of the market. It belongs in vehicles where absolute range matters less than price and durability: smaller cars, urban fleets, delivery vans, and above all, stationary storage, where weight barely matters at all. Sodium does not win the density race, and it likely never will, but energy density is only one dimension of a battery's worth. In 2 other arenas, surviving brutal cold and resisting fire, sodium doesn't merely compete with lithium, it may actually surpass it. Energy density is only one axis of battery performance. Turn the dial toward temperature and sodium's story reverses. Lithium-ion cells suffer in the cold. Below freezing, their internal resistance climbs, the electrolyte thickens, and lithium plating begins to scar the anode. A conventional electric car parked overnight at -20 can wake up having lost 30% of its usable range. Sodium ions, larger and more loosely bound, move more freely through their host structures at low temperatures. CATL claims its Naxtra battery retains roughly 90% of its capacity at -40 degrees Celsius, a threshold where lithium chemistries falter badly. For drivers in Harbin, Helsinki, or the Canadian prairies, that difference is not a footnote. It is the difference between a car that starts and a car that strands you. Then there is the question of fire. Lithium-ion's greatest liability is thermal runaway, a chain reaction in which a damaged or overheated cell feeds its own combustion, releasing oxygen and reaching temperatures beyond 800 degrees. Every recalled laptop, every airport battery ban, every viral video of a burning vehicle traces back to this chemistry's volatility. Sodium-ion cells are inherently more forgiving. Their electrolytes and electrode materials are less prone to the runaway cascade, and CATL staged deliberately brutal demonstrations to prove it. Engineers drilled Naxtra cells, crushed them, cut them with saws, and overcharged them past specification. The company reported no fire, no explosion, no thermal runaway. They even claimed a sodium cell could be transported at 0% charge, eliminating a shipping hazard that haunts the lithium industry. For stationary storage, where thousands of cells sit packed inside warehouses and grid substations, this safety margin is transformative. A single lithium fire in a storage facility can burn for days and demand specialized suppression. Sodium promises calmer nights for the engineers who build these systems. Cold tolerance and fire resistance are genuine, measurable advantages, and they reshape where sodium makes sense. But safety and temperature do not pay the bill. To understand why manufacturers are truly circling this chemistry, we have to follow the money, down to the cost of every raw kilogram. Every battery is, at heart, an economic object. And here, sodium wields its sharpest weapon. Begin with the raw materials. Lithium carbonate, even after its price collapsed from the 2022 peak of roughly $80,000 per ton, remains a volatile and geographically concentrated commodity. Cobalt is mined largely in the Democratic Republic of Congo, tangled in ethical and supply concerns. Nickel prices swing on Indonesian export policy and London Metal Exchange shocks. Sodium answers all of this with brute abundance. Sodium carbonate, or soda ash, costs a fraction of lithium carbonate, and the element makes up around 2.6% of the Earth's crust, roughly 1,000 times more plentiful than lithium. It is pulled from seawater and vast mineral deposits on nearly every continent. Sodium batteries can also abandon the copper current collector used in lithium cells, replacing it with cheaper aluminum on both electrodes, because sodium does not alloy with aluminum at low voltage. That single substitution trims cost and weight from every cell. The cathode chemistries, often based on Prussian blue analogs or layered oxides using iron and manganese, sidestep cobalt and nickel entirely. Analysts project that at genuine scale, sodium-ion cells could undercut lithium iron phosphate by 20 to 30%, and possibly more as manufacturing matures. That margin matters most at the bottom of the market. For a budget electric car priced under $20,000, or a grid storage installation measured in gigawatt hours, a 30% cut on the most expensive component reshapes the entire business case. Affordability is where sodium does not merely compete, but potentially wins outright. Yet cost advantages on paper mean nothing without production. A cheaper cell that exists only in a laboratory changes no market. The lithium industry has spent 15 years building gigafactories, supply contracts, and refining capacity that sodium cannot conjure overnight. The real test is whether CATL can move Naxtra from a launch event into millions of finished cells rolling off assembly lines. That test begins in 2026, and it will decide whether sodium's economic promise becomes an economic reality across roads and power grids alike. CATL did not unveil Naxtra as a science project. It announced a schedule. Mass production of the sodium-ion line is slated to begin in 2026, and the company has laid out where those cells will go. The first frontier is transportation, but not the flagship long-range sedans that dominate marketing campaigns. Sodium's home is the affordable segment, compact city cars, entry-level electric vehicles, and the vast Chinese market for 2- and 3-wheelers and micro-mobility, where range demands are modest and price sensitivity is extreme. CATL has also targeted heavy-duty applications like electric trucks that operate on fixed routes and can accept lower energy density in exchange for cost, cold resilience, and longer cycle life. The second frontier, and perhaps the larger one, is stationary storage. Grid-scale batteries do not move, so their weight and volume matter far less than their price per kilowatt hour and their safety over thousands of charge cycles. Here, sodium's abundance, fire resistance, and durability align almost perfectly with market needs. CATL envisions sodium cells stacking into containerized systems that firm up solar and wind farms, smooth peak demand, and back up unstable grids across China and beyond. The manufacturing scale-up rides on CATL's existing dominance. As the world's largest battery maker, commanding more than a third of the global market, the company can adapt production lines, leverage established supply chains, and push sodium cells into products at a velocity no startup could match. It has hinted at hybrid battery packs too, combining sodium and lithium cells in a single system to balance cost against range, managed by intelligent controls that draw from each chemistry's strengths. Still, ambition meets friction. Building a raw sodium supply chain, qualifying automakers, and proving field reliability across years, not press demonstrations, all take time. The 2026 rollout is a beginning, not a finish line. So the question that opened this film returns, sharpened by everything we now know. Will sodium dethrone lithium or take a seat beside it? The evidence has been gathering, and it points toward a single, clarifying answer. Lay the evidence side by side, and the verdict resolves into focus. Sodium is cheaper, safer, more abundant, and dramatically better in the cold. Lithium remains denser, lighter, and more mature, with a 15-year head start in factories, refineries, and engineering know-how. These are not rankings of a winner and a loser. They are two different tools shaped for two different jobs. Sodium's energy density, hovering around 175 watt-hours per kilogram in CATL's best cells, still trails lithium iron phosphate and falls far short of the nickel-rich packs powering premium long-range vehicles. That physical gap will narrow with research, but it will not vanish. The ions themselves are heavier, the chemistry fundamentally bulkier. For the electric supercar, the long-haul luxury sedan, the aircraft dreaming of electric flight, lithium remains irreplaceable. But most of the world does not need 500 miles of range. It needs affordable transportation and reliable, fire-safe storage. A commuter car covering 40 miles a day. A scooter in a crowded megacity. A shipping container of cells steadying a solar farm through a freezing night. In each of these, sodium is not a compromise. It is the better fit, freeing scarce lithium for the applications that truly demand it. This is the deeper logic. As electrification expands to billions of devices and vehicles, no single chemistry can supply it all. Diversifying onto sodium eases pressure on lithium, cobalt, and nickel supply chains, blunts geopolitical choke points, and lowers the price floor for clean energy everywhere. Sodium does not conquer that future, it enlarges it. CATL's Naxtra, launching into production in 2026, is not the death of lithium. It is the arrival of a partner, dividing the vast territory of electrification along the natural borders of cost, climate, and need. The abundant element beneath our feet has finally earned its place in the machinery of the energy transition, not by overthrowing the incumbent, but by taking up the burdens lithium was never meant to carry. In the great transition ahead, the conclusion is now clear. Sodium will share the throne, not seize it.